The autumn chill had settled over St. Louis as Joyce Meyer finished her lunch meeting at Cardwell's, an upscale restaurant in Plaza Frontenac. It had been a productive discussion about her upcoming speaking tour, and Joyce was gathering her notes while her assistant settled the bill. The restaurant hummed with the gentle clatter of silverware and muted conversations of business people and shoppers taking refuge from the cool October air. Joyce glanced at her watch. She had just enough time to make it back to the ministry offices for her afternoon appointments. As she stood to leave, smoothing the creases from her tailored blazer, a movement near the restaurant entrance caught her eye. A young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, hesitated by the host's stand, her thin jacket inadequate against the fall weather. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and even from a distance, Joyce could see the exhaustion etched on her face. The host, a polished young man in a crisp white shirt, seemed to be explaining something to her with increasing discomfort. "I'll just be a minute," Joyce told her assistant, her intuition drawing her toward the exchange. As she approached, fragments of conversation became clear. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't give out leftovers. It's against our policy," the host was saying, his voice low but firm. The young woman's shoulders slumped slightly, but she maintained her composure, dignity evident in her straight posture despite the rejection. "I understand," the woman replied softly. "I just thought I'd ask. Thank you anyway." She turned to leave, her hand clutching a worn backpack strap. Something in her demeanor, not defeat, but a quiet resilience, stirred something deep within Joyce. Before she could second-guess herself, Joyce stepped forward. "Excuse me," Joyce called, her voice gentle but carrying across the polished floor of the entrance area. The young woman turned, surprise flickering across her face as recognition dawned. It was a look Joyce had grown accustomed to over decades of ministry, the double-take of someone who knew her from television or books, but never expected to encounter her in person. "I'm Joyce," she said simply, extending her hand. "I know who you are," the woman replied, a hint of embarrassment coloring her cheeks as she accepted the handshake. "I'm Melissa. I used to watch your program with my grandmother every morning." Her voice carried a slight tremor, whether from cold or emotion, Joyce couldn't tell. Up close, Joyce noticed details she'd missed from afar. The careful mending on Melissa's jacket sleeve, the worn edges of her shoes, the faint shadows beneath intelligent brown eyes. Joyce felt a familiar prompting in her spirit, the gentle nudge she'd learned to recognize over years of ministry. "Would you join me for a moment?" she asked, gesturing toward her recently vacated table where her assistant waited, curiosity evident on her face. Melissa hesitated, glancing toward the exit, then back at Joyce. Something in Joyce's expression must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. "I don't want to take up your time," Melissa said, as they walked back to the table. She paused, searching for words that wouldn't come easily. Joyce waited patiently, settling into her chair and motioning for Melissa to take the seat across from her. The restaurant manager appeared briefly, concern crossing his features until Joyce smiled reassuringly. In that moment, as Melissa carefully placed her backpack on the floor beside her chair, Joyce sensed this wasn't a random encounter, but a divine appointment, one that would change more lives than either of them could imagine. The restaurant's warm lighting cast a gentle glow over their table as Melissa sat across from Joyce, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the linen tablecloth. Joyce signaled to her assistant, who discreetly stepped away to give them privacy. "Would you like something to eat, Melissa?" Joyce asked, her voice carrying no judgment, only genuine concern. The question hung in the air for a moment as Melissa's pride wrestled with her hunger. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning," Melissa finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to make my money stretch until I get my first paycheck from my new job." She straightened in her chair, as if to emphasize that this was temporary. "I start tomorrow, administrative assistant at a law firm downtown. It's just been a rough few months getting here." Joyce nodded encouragingly, signaling a waiter who approached with professional efficiency. After ordering a full meal for Melissa, Joyce leaned forward slightly. "Tell me how you ended up here today," she said. It wasn't a demand, but an invitation, one that opened a floodgate. Melissa took a deep breath and began to share her story, her words hesitant at first, then flowing more freely as Joyce listened with undivided attention. 6 months earlier, Melissa had been living in Nashville with a steady job in healthcare administration and an apartment she shared with a roommate. "Then my mom got sick pancreatic cancer," Melissa explained, her eyes momentarily clouding with grief. "I moved back to St. Louis to care for her. I thought I had enough savings, but between helping with her medical bills and the funeral expenses..." She trailed off, the rest of the story clear enough. Joyce reached across the table and briefly covered Melissa's hand with her own, a gesture of understanding that required no words. The waiter returned with Melissa's meal, a hearty sandwich, soup, and side salad. Joyce noticed how Melissa paused before eating, closing her eyes briefly in a silent prayer of thanks. It was a small gesture that spoke volumes about her character. As Melissa ate, she continued her story, explaining how she'd been staying at a women's shelter while job hunting, determined to get back on her feet. "I've been on 15 interviews in 3 weeks," she said with quiet pride. "The law firm finally took a chance on me." "That's no small accomplishment," Joyce affirmed, recognizing the determination it must have taken to persist through rejection and uncertainty. "Finding a job in this economy shows real perseverance." Melissa smiled slightly at the validation, some of the tension easing from her shoulders as she continued eating. Around them, the restaurant had begun to empty as the lunch crowd dispersed, but neither woman noticed the passage of time. As Melissa finished her meal, she revealed more of her story, how her grandmother had raised her after her father left, and her mother struggled with depression. How that same grandmother had introduced her to Joyce's teachings, and how those lessons about perseverance had sustained her through recent hardships. "I keep telling myself what you always say, that difficult times are seasons, not destinations," Melissa said, a hint of embarrassment coloring her cheeks at quoting Joyce to her face. Joyce felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest, the profound gratitude that came whenever she witnessed how God used her words to strengthen someone during their darkest moments. This wasn't just about providing a meal. It was about affirming Melissa's journey and the strength she'd shown. As their conversation continued, Joyce became increasingly certain that their meeting wasn't coincidental, but providential. A divine intersection of paths that would lead to something neither of them could yet envision. The restaurant had nearly emptied when Joyce's assistant approached, discreetly reminding her of afternoon commitments. Joyce nodded in acknowledgement, but made no move to leave. Instead, she studied Melissa thoughtfully, noting the young woman's intelligence and dignity despite her circumstances. A plan was forming in Joyce's mind, not the calculated charity of a public figure, but the genuine response of one human heart to another's need. "Melissa," Joyce began, her voice gentle but direct, "I believe God arranged our meeting today." She saw no need to dance around her faith. It was the foundation of everything she did. "Would you allow me to help you get settled until your first paycheck comes through?" Melissa's expression shifted from surprise to hesitation, the internal struggle between pride and practicality playing across her features. Joyce understood this tension all too well. remembering her own difficult years before her ministry grew. "I'm not looking for charity," Melissa said carefully, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. "I've always taken care of myself." There was strength in her voice, the same resilience that had carried her through months of hardship. Joyce respected it too much to offer help in a way that might diminish it. Around them, waitstaff began preparing for the dinner service, their movements creating a gentle background rhythm to the conversation. "It's not charity," Joyce replied, leaning forward slightly. "It's one person helping another through a season of transition. I've been where you are, maybe not in exactly the same circumstances, but I know what it's like to wonder how you'll make it to the next paycheck." She paused, allowing her words to settle. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is accept help when it's offered with no strings attached. Melissa was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the table before rising again to meet Joyce's. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, practical even in her vulnerability. Joyce appreciated her directness. It confirmed what she'd sensed about Melissa's character. The restaurant manager passed by their table, his curious glance suggesting he recognized Joyce but was too professional to interrupt. "A place to stay until you're on your feet, some professional clothes for your new job, and groceries to get you started," Joyce said simply. "My ministry maintains a transitional apartment for situations just like this." What she didn't mention was that the idea for such an apartment had come from her own experience of receiving help when she most needed it decades earlier. "It's fully furnished and available immediately." The offer hung between them as Melissa processed it, her expression shifting through a range of emotions: surprise, hesitation, hope, and finally, a cautious acceptance. "I could repay you once I'm stable," she offered, maintaining her dignity even in acceptance. Joyce shook her head gently. "Pay it forward someday when you're in a position to help someone else," she suggested instead. By now, several of the restaurant staff had noticed the extended conversation at Joyce's table. The manager approached, concern evident in his professional demeanor. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Meyer?" he inquired politely. Joyce smiled warmly at him, an idea suddenly taking shape. "Actually," she replied, "I wonder if I might have a word with you privately." She excused herself briefly from Melissa, following the manager a short distance away. Their conversation was brief but intense, with Joyce gesturing occasionally toward Melissa. The manager's expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful consideration, and finally to agreement. When Joyce returned to the table, there was a new energy in her movements. "Melissa," she said, retaking her seat, "I believe God has bigger plans for our meeting today than either of us initially thought." As she began to explain her conversation with the manager, neither woman noticed that other diners had begun to pay attention to their table, drawn by some indefinable sense that something extraordinary was unfolding in their midst. The restaurant manager, Michael Cardwell himself, approached their table with purpose in his stride. "Ms. Thompson," he addressed Melissa formally, "Joyce has shared a bit of your situation with me." His professional demeanor softened slightly as he continued. "We happen to be looking for someone to coordinate our community outreach program working with local shelters to distribute quality meals. Your healthcare administration background and personal experience would be valuable assets." Melissa's eyes widened in surprise, darting between Joyce and Mr. Cardwell. "I don't understand," Melissa said carefully. "I already accepted the law firm position." Joyce watched the interaction silently, recognizing the delicate moment of opportunity unfolding. Mr. Cardwell nodded in acknowledgement. "The position would be part-time, evenings and weekends, with flexible hours that wouldn't conflict with your day job. It includes a meal during each shift and a small stipend." He paused, adding, Consider it a second income stream while you're rebuilding. As the conversation continued, Joyce noticed something remarkable happening around them. The remaining diners and staff had grown quiet, their attention drawn to the unfolding scene. A waitress stood nearby, order pad forgotten in her hand, eyes glistening with unshed tears. An elderly couple at a corner table leaned toward each other, whispering intently while watching Joyce and Melissa. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted palpably from the polite detachment of a high-end establishment to something warmer and more connected. When Melissa tentatively accepted both Mr. Cardwell's offer and Joyce's assistance, a spontaneous ripple of applause broke out. Startled, Melissa turned to see nearly everyone in the restaurant watching them, many with visible emotion on their faces. A middle-aged woman approached their table, hand extended toward Melissa. "I'm sorry for intruding," she said, "but I wanted you to have this." She pressed a business card into Melissa's hand. "I manage a women's clothing boutique upstairs. Come see me tomorrow. I'd like to help with your professional wardrobe." What followed was unlike anything Joyce had witnessed in her decades of ministry. One by one, people approached their table, a retired teacher offering to drive Melissa to work until she could afford car repairs, a financial advisor volunteering to help her create a budget, a young couple insisting on paying for her meal and pressing grocery gift cards into her hands. Each gesture seemed to inspire another, creating a spontaneous community of support around a woman most of them had never met before today. Joyce watched in wonder as the restaurant transformed into something that felt sacred, a space where strangers recognized themselves in Melissa's struggle and found healing in the opportunity to help. Mr. Cardwell stood by, visibly moved, as his establishment became the unlikely setting for this outpouring of compassion. "In 20 years of restaurant management," he murmured to Joyce, "I've never seen anything like this." A young waitress approached hesitantly, her serving tray clutched against her chest like a shield. "I was homeless last year," she confessed quietly to Melissa. "Someone helped me too. If you need anything at all, I'm here Tuesday through Saturday." The simple offer, delivered with such vulnerability, brought fresh tears to Melissa's eyes. Joyce noticed how Melissa straightened her shoulders, receiving each offer not with embarrassment, but with increasing grace and dignity. By the time Joyce's assistant gently reminded her of her now significantly delayed appointments, the restaurant had transformed. Phone numbers had been exchanged, arrangements made, and a network of support established around Melissa that extended far beyond Joyce's initial offer of help. As they prepared to leave, Joyce noticed Mr. Cardwell speaking intently with his staff, who nodded with new purpose. Later, she would learn that this day had sparked a formal outreach program at the Restaurant One that would eventually partner with her ministry to serve hundreds of people in transition. Outside in the parking lot, as Joyce's assistant loaded Melissa's backpack containing everything she currently owned into Joyce's car, Melissa turned to Joyce with wonder in her eyes. "I just came here hoping for leftover food," she said softly. "How did this happen?" Joyce smiled, recognizing the question as both practical and profound. "That's how God works," she replied simply. "We think we're asking for crumbs, but He has a feast prepared, one that often looks nothing like what we expected." 1 year later, Joyce found herself back at Cardwell's, this time for the restaurant's first annual community table fundraiser. The event, co-sponsored by Joyce Meyer Ministries, had transformed the elegant dining room into a gathering space where people from all walks of life shared meals and stories. At the center of the activity stood Melissa, confidently directing volunteers while occasionally checking her watch. She was due at the law firm later for a meeting about her recent promotion. Joyce watched with quiet satisfaction as Melissa navigated the room, her professional confidence a stark contrast to the uncertain young woman of a year ago. The transitional apartment had indeed been temporary. After 3 months, Melissa had saved enough for her own place. The professional wardrobe offered by the boutique owner had expanded as Melissa's circumstances improved. Most remarkably, the spontaneous community that formed that day had remained, evolving into a structured program that had helped dozens of others through similar transitions. "She's quite remarkable," Michael Cardwell commented, appearing at Joyce's side. "Did you know she's mentoring 3 women from the shelter now? Uses her lunch breaks to help them with job applications?" Joyce nodded, unsurprised. She had witnessed Melissa's transformation from recipient to giver, the most beautiful progression in any life touched by genuine compassion. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with conversation as current program participants mingled with supporters and volunteers. A local news crew had set up in one corner, interviewing participants about the program's impact. Joyce deliberately stayed in the background, recognizing that this story wasn't about her celebrity or ministry, but about how a community had formed around one person's need and discovered its own capacity for compassion. When the reporter inevitably approached her for comment, Joyce redirected them to Melissa. "She's the heart of this program," Joyce insisted. "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." Later, as the event wound down, Melissa joined Joyce at a quiet table near the window. "I have something to show you," she said, pulling a small notebook from her purse. She opened it to reveal a list of names, dozens of them, each with notes beside them. "These are all the people I've been able to help this year," she explained, her finger tracing the entries. "Each time I help someone, I tell them about that day you found me asking for leftovers." Her voice carried no shame in the memory, only wonder and gratitude. Joyce felt tears prick her eyes as she recognized the profound multiplication of that single act of kindness. "This is how healing works in communities," she said softly. "One person reaches out, then another and another. Before long, the helpers need help, the givers receive, and everyone recognizes themselves in each other." Melissa nodded, understanding the deeper truth in Joyce's words. The restaurant around them stood as physical proof of this principle. Its business had flourished as its purpose expanded. As they prepared to leave, a young woman approached their table hesitantly. Joyce recognized the familiar signs of someone on the edge, the careful preservation of dignity despite difficult circumstances, the mixture of pride and desperation. "Ms. Thompson?" the woman asked, addressing Melissa. "The shelter counselor said I should talk to you about the program." Melissa immediately stood, extending her hand in welcome, her face reflecting the same compassion Joyce had shown her a year earlier. Joyce slipped away quietly, allowing Melissa to guide the newcomer to a private table. Through the restaurant window, Joyce watched as Melissa listened intently to the young woman's story, offering the same undivided attention she had once received. The scene was a perfect mirror of their first meeting, except now Melissa occupied the position of strength and stability, able to extend help rather than receive it. In her car, Joyce reflected on the extraordinary ripple effects of what had seemed, at the time, like a simple response to someone in need. What had begun as a private interaction had transformed an entire community, creating ongoing opportunities for connection and healing. The program had already expanded to 3 other restaurants in the city, each creating its own network of support for people in transition. As she drove away, Joyce thought about how often the most significant ministry happened not on stages or through broadcasts, but in these intimate moments of human connection. A meal shared, a story heard, a hand extended. The greatest testimony wasn't the dramatic transformation of one life, but how that transformation multiplied outward, touching countless others. What had started with a simple request for leftovers had become a feast of compassion that continued to nourish an entire community, a living demonstration of how ordinary moments approached with extraordinary love could change not just one life, but many. In a world that often feels divided and disconnected, stories like Joyce and Melissa's remind us of a profound truth. We are all just one conversation away from changing someone's life forever. What began as a simple request for leftovers transformed not just two lives, but an entire community, proving that compassion, once set in motion, creates ripples we may never fully witness. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this story isn't the grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the recognition that flashed between two strangers, the understanding that beneath our different circumstances, we share the same human needs: to be seen, to be heard, and to know that our struggles matter to someone else. Joyce Meyer could have simply offered Melissa a meal and gone on with her day. Instead, she recognized a divine appointment, a sacred intersection of lives that demanded more than passing kindness. In doing so, she demonstrated what true ministry looks like, not just preaching hope from a distance, but walking alongside someone in their moment of need. The miracle wasn't just what Joyce did for Melissa, it was what Melissa went on to do for others. This is the ultimate testimony of genuine compassion. It never remains contained, but multiplies exponentially, turning recipients into givers who understand the profound dignity in both roles. As you reflect on this story, consider the Melissas who might be crossing your path today. People whose lives could be transformed not by grand gestures, but by your willingness to pause, to see them truly, and to respond with the simple recognition of their humanity and worth. Remember, the most powerful words in any language might just be, "I see you. You matter, and you're not alone in this." If this story touched your heart today, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's kindness changed the trajectory of your life? Or perhaps you've been the one to extend that hand to someone else? Share your story. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you'd like more stories that remind us of the extraordinary impact of ordinary compassion, please subscribe to our channel. Each week, we share real-life testimonies that restore our faith in humanity and inspire us to be agents of change in our own communities. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for spending this time with us today. Your presence here matters more than you know.